Good morning, class. Before our instruction proper, may I call on Miss Domingo to lead our prayer. Once again, good morning, class. Our topic for today is all about implementing a curriculum daily in the classroom. Implementing curriculum daily in the classroom is based on DepEd Order number 70, series of 2012, which states that teachers of all public elementary and secondary schools will not be required to prepare detailed lesson plans. They may adopt daily lesson logs which contain the need information and guide from the teacher guide or TG and teacher manual or TM reference material with page number, interventions given to the students, and remarks to indicate how many students have mastered the lesson or are needing remediation. However, teachers with less than 2 years teaching experience shall be required to prepare daily lesson plans which shall include the following. Starting the class right, laying down the curriculum plan. Before the class begins every day, a teacher must have a written lesson plan. The main parts of lesson plan are: first, the objectives or the intended learning outcomes or the ELO. Second is the subject matter. Third is the procedure or strategies of teaching. Fourth, assessment of learning outcomes or the ALO. And last, the assignment or agreement. First part of a lesson plan is what we call the intended learning outcomes or the objectives. What do we mean by intended learning outcomes or objectives? These are the desired learning that will be the focus of the lesson. Learning outcomes are based on taxonomy of objectives presented to us as cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. Bloom's taxonomy has revisited by his own student Lorraine Anderson and David Cratwell. Let us study both in the comparison. Bloom's taxonomy 1956 consists of knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation, while the revised Bloom's by Anderson 2001 consists of remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. There are three major changes in the revised taxonomy. These are: first, changing the names in the 6 categories from nouns to verbs. Second, rearranging these categories. And third, establishing the levels of the knowledge level in the original version. Point: let us now study the cognitive categories with the example keywords or verbs for each in the new version of Bloom's taxonomy that follows. For the first category, which is remembering, it is a recall or retrieve previous learned information. In creating an intended learning outcomes or objectives, we will be using the keywords like defines, describes, identifies, labels, lists, outlines, selects, and states. For instance, for the topic polygon, let us use the word define. Example of objective in this category is define what is polygon. Second category is understanding. Comprehend meaning, translation, state problem in own words, or making meaning. The keywords for this category are comprehends, explains, distinguishes, estimates, gives, examples, interprets, predicts, rewrites, and summarizes. For example, explain the different types of polygon. The next, in applying, use concept in new situation. applies what has been learned in new situation. The keywords for this category are applies, changes, computes, operates, constructs, modifies, uses, manipulated, prepares, shows, or solve. For example, solve for the value of x. If it is an objective, you can say the learner, at the end of the discussion, the learners will be able to solve for the value of x. Next category is analyzing. Analyzing means separate materials or concepts into component parts so that the organization is clear. Distinguish between facts and inferences. The keywords for this category are breaks down, compares, contrasts, diagrams, differentiates, discriminate, identifies, infers, outlines, relates, selects, and separates. Example objective for this category is compare and contrast what is the difference between critical and creative thinking. The objective will be, at the end of the discussion, the students will be able to compare and contrast the difference between creative and critical thinking, like that. The next category is evaluating. Evaluating make judgments about the value of ideas or materials. The example keywords for this category are appraises, compares, criticizes, defends, describes, discriminates, evaluates, interprets, justifies, and summarizes. For example, at the end of the discussion, the students will be able to justify the relationship between relation and function. And last category is creating. Creating, build a structure or pattern from various elements. Put parts together to create a whole, to make new meaning and structure. The example keywords for these are composes, compiles, designs, generates, modifies, organizes, rearranges, reorganize, or create. For example, at the end of the discussion, the students will be able to compose their own song using the discussed topic. In writing objectives or intended learning outcomes, it is always recommended that more of the higher order thinking skills or HATS should be developed and less of the low-level thinking skills or LATs for learners. The low-level categories will develop LATs and thinking skills progress as the categories move higher. Thinking skills or the so-called HATS includes creating, evaluating, analyzing, applying, understanding, and remembering. The lower order thinking skills or the so-called LATs includes verbal receiving, passive, visual receiving, receiving and participating, active, and doing. These are the equivalent skills from LATs to HATS, or the lower order thinking skills to higher order thinking skills. In LATs, it is verbal receiving, while in higher order thinking skills, it is equivalent to remembering. While a passive indicates understanding, a visual receiving is equivalent to applying in HATS, while the receiving and participating in LATs is equivalent to analyzing, and the active is equivalent to evaluating, while the doing in lower order thinking skills means creating in higher order thinking skills. Another revision is the expansion of the concept of knowledge, which was not given emphasis nor discussed thoroughly before. What are the different levels of knowledge? First is the factual knowledge. When we say factual knowledge, these are the ideas, specific data, or information. While conceptual knowledge are the words or ideas known by common name, common features, multiple specific examples, which may either be concrete or abstract. Concepts are facts that interrelate with each other to function together. Third is the procedural knowledge. When we say procedural knowledge, it is how things work, step-by-step actions, or the methods of inquiry. Next is the metacognitive knowledge. When we say metacognitive knowledge, it is the knowledge of cognition in general, awareness of knowledge of one's own cognition, thinking about thinking. Important note. Let's take note that the intended learning outcomes or the ELO or the objectives should be written in a smart way. What do we mean by the word smart? Smart means specific, measurable, attainable, result-oriented or outcomes, and time-bound. Of course, if you are writing an objective or intended learning outcomes, it must be specific for you to have a center of focus or goal-oriented. It is also need to be measurable and of course attainable. Result-oriented to make sure that every after teaching your students, there is an important result for them. That is the learning. And of course time-bound. It covers enough time or it will take not short or very long term of discussion or what and enough time. Let's move on to the subject matter or content. Subject matter or content comes from a body of knowledge, the facts, concepts, procedures, and metacognition that will be learned through the guidance of the teacher. Subject matter is the what in teaching. In a plan, this is followed by the references. Next part of a lesson plan is the procedure or methods and strategies. This is the crux of curriculum implementation. How a teacher will put life to the intended outcomes, and the subject matter to be used depends on this component. Simply, this is your method of teaching, the procedure, how you will be going to impart the knowledge or the topic to your students. Actually, there are many ways of teaching for the different kinds of teachers. Corpus and Salandanan 2013 enumerated the following approaches and methods which may be useful for the different kinds of learners. Some are time-tested methods, while the others are non-conventional constructive methods. The first method is the direct demonstration methods, guided exploratory, discovery approach, inquiry method, problem-based learning or PBL, and project method. Second one is the cooperative approaches. It includes peer tutoring, learning action cells, think, pair, share. Third is the deductive or inductive approaches, project method, and inquiry-based learning. Last, or other approaches, blended learning, reflective teaching, integrated learning, outcome-based approach. Teachers have to take consideration that the different strategies should match with the learning styles of the students. Students have different styles. there are many classifications of learning styles according to the different authors. The multiple intelligence theory of Howard Gardner implies several learning styles, but for our lesson, we will just focus on the three learning styles, which are visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. These three preferred styles can help teachers choose the method and the materials they will use. First characteristic is the visual. When we say visual, the teacher will use graphs, charts, pictures, tends to remember things that are written form. Tips for teachers about learner. Turn notes into pictures, diagrams, maps. Learn the big picture first than details. Make mind maps and concept maps. For instance, in mathematics, for you to be easily understand the topic, for example, a pie graph, the teacher should draw a circle and make it a pie, then explain the details, but focus more on the picture rather than details. Next is auditory. When we say auditory, it recalls information through hearing and speaking, prefers to be told how to do things orally, and learns aloud. Tips for the teachers about learner. Record lectures and listen to this. Repeat materials out loud, parrots. Read aloud. Because there are students that easily learn when they hear or listen to an instruction. Last is the kinesthetic. When we say kinesthetic, it prefers hands-on approach, demonstrates how to do rather than explain, likes group work with hands-on, minds-on. Learn something while doing another things, eats while studying, work while standing, like field work, do many things at one time. For example, in an experiment or in science lab, let your students experience or do an experiment to easily understand the concept. Learning must be supported by instructional materials like PowerPoint presentation, video presentation, and the like. It is what we call the IMs. Considering the teaching methodologies and the learning styles, the different support materials should be varied. This will ensure that the individual differences will be considered. Instructional materials should be complement visual, auditory, and tactile, or a combination of the three. However, following Dale's cone of learning, which is devised, can help teachers to make decisions on what resources and materials will maximize learning. This is the cone of learning. This cone of learning shows the different examples of learning styles. First is reading. Nature of involvement is verbal reading. It is believed that after 2 weeks, we tend to remember 10% of what we read. While in hearing words, it is auditory. It is believed that after 2 weeks, 20% of what we hear will be remembered. Next, looking at pictures. This is a visual. After 2 weeks, we tend to remember 30% of what we see. Next, watching a movie, looking at an exhibit, watching a demonstration, seeing it done on location. The nature of involvement here are visual receiving and participating. The fact is, after 2 weeks, we tend to remember 50% of what we hear and see, and 70% of what we say. Last is, examples on these are participating in a discussion, giving a talk, doing a dramatic presentation, simulating the real experience, doing the real thing. It is kinetic, and the nature of involvement is actually doing, And it is believed that after 2 weeks, we tend to remember 90% of what we say and do. So, what instructional support materials will the teacher use according to learning styles and outcomes to be achieved? Here are some guidelines. First, use of direct, purposeful experience through learning by doing retains almost of all learning outcomes. 90% of learning is retained. Example, field trip, field study, community, immersion, and practice teaching. Let us connect this on John Dewey's theory of experience. It is believed that learning is a long term, or we will learn easily if we experience that thing or phenomena that is being taught to us. Because I believe, and we all believe, that experience is the best teacher. Second one, participation in class activities, discussion, reporting, and similar activities where the learners have the opportunity to say and write. 70% of learning is remembered. Examples are small group discussion, buzz sessions, individual reporting, role play, and panel. Of course, it is to exercise our oral skills, our communication skills, how to be an effective speaker, not just viewer. It is an active or interactive skill or ability that a learner should develop. Third is passive participation, as in watching a movie, viewing exhibit, watching demonstration will retain around 50% of what has been. Of course, there are students that easily learn, or their learning styles focus on visual. Fourth, by just looking at still pictures, illustration, drawings will allow the retention of around 30% material content. There are learners that learn easily from the discussion if they see a picture or visual presentation of it. Fifth, by hearing, as in lecture, sermon, monologues, only 20% remembered. If you will notice here, the percentage of learning is decreasing while the method or the learning style getting easily or getting more basic. Regardless amount of remembering, from the concrete to abstract, each layer contributes to learning and require instructional support materials. Visual, concrete, flat, three-dimension, realistic, models, or abstract, the verbal symbols or words. In audio, recordings of sound, natural or artificial. Audiovisual, combination of what can be seen and heard. Kinesthetic, manipulative materials like modeling clay, rings, dumbbells, equipment, others. Experiential, utilized to all the modalities. Methods and materials must implement the plan, taking action. Example number 1. Lesson using the basic steps and parts as prescribed by DepEd Order number 70 series of 2012 for teachers, 2 years and less in services. This lesson plan will show the basic components of any plan. This can be applied to any subject that follows a genetic format. Let's take a look. Lesson plan in science. These are the parts, different parts. First is the objectives or intended learning outcomes, which tell that force is applied to move objects. Describe that pushing or pulling with a force moves object. State that if force moves the object away from the person, it is a push. Last, state that If the force moves the object towards the person, it is pull. Second part is the subject matter. It must be stated the topic, the references, and the science concepts. Next is the procedure, the preparatory activity, the lesson proper, and the fourth is the assessment of learning outcomes. Then last is the assignment. At the end of the activity, the teacher will find out if the learning outcomes have been converted into achieved learning outcomes. Tests and other tools are utilized at the end of the lesson to identify this, what knowledge, proper, or process. At the end of the activity, the teacher will find out if the intended learning outcomes have been converted into achieved learning outcomes. Tests and other tools are utilized at the end of the lesson to identify this, what knowledge, process understanding and performance, or the KPAP, are demonstrated by the learners. The rule of thumb is what has been taught should be measured to find out if the intended learning outcomes set at the beginning has been achieved. More detailed discussion will be found in the module on evaluation of the curriculum. That's all for today. Thank you for watching and I hope you've learned something. God bless.